A platoon is a military unit typically composed of more than 2 squads, sections, patrols. Platoon organization varies depending on the country and the branch, but typically a platoon consists of around 15 to 30 soldiers. A platoon leader, a commander, is the officer in command of a platoon. This person is usually a junior officer of second or first lieutenant or an equivalent rank. The officer is usually assisted by a platoon sergeant. A platoon is the smallest military unit led by a commissioned officer. Platoons normally consist of 3 or 4 sections of squads. In some armies, platoon is used throughout the branches of the army. In others, such as the British Army and other Commonwealth armies, platoons are associated with the infantry. In a few armies, such as the French Army, a platoon is specifically a cavalry unit, and the infantry use section as the equivalent unit. A unit consisting of several platoons is called a company, battery, troop. Early usage. Etymology. According to Merriam-Webster, the term was first used in the 17th century to refer to a small body of musketeers who fired together in a volley alternately with another platoon. The word came from the 17th century French peloton, from pelote meaning a small ball. The suffix on can be an augmentative suffix in French, but on the other hand is generally a diminutive suffix in relationship to animals. So the original intention in forming peloton from pelote is not clear. Nonetheless, it is documented that it took the meaning of a group of soldiers firing a volley together while a different platoon reloaded. This implies an augmentative intention in the etymology, since soldiers were often organized into 3 lines, which were supposed to fire volleys together. This would have normally meant platoons organized with the intention of a half or a third of the company firing at once. The modern French word peloton, when not meaning platoon, can refer to the main body of riders in a bicycle race. Pelote itself originally comes from the Low Latin pilota, from Latin pila, meaning ball, and the French suffix on derives from the Latin suffix onus, used as a firing unit. The platoon was originally a firing unit rather than an organization. The system was said to have been invented by Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden in 1618. In the French army in the 1670s, a battalion was divided into 18 platoons who were grouped into 3 firings, each platoon in the firing either actually firing or reloading. The system was also used in the British, Austrian, Russian and Dutch armies. Modern usage. On the 1st of October 1913, under a scheme by General Sir Ivor Maxse, the regular battalions of the British Army were reorganized from the previous 8 companies to a 4-company structure, with each company having 4 platoons as separate units, each commanded by a lieutenant with a platoon sergeant as his deputy. Each platoon was divided into 4 sections, each commanded by a corporal. Due to a shortage of officers, a non-commissioned officer rank of platoon sergeant major was introduced from 1938 to 1940 for experienced non-commissioned officers who were given command of platoons. Australian organisation. In the Australian Army, an infantry platoon has 36 soldiers organised into 3 8-man sections and a 12-man manoeuvre support section. A lieutenant as platoon commander and a sergeant as platoon sergeant, accompanied by a platoon sig and sometimes a platoon medic. A section comprises 8 soldiers led by a corporal with a lance corporal as second in command. Each section has 2 fire teams of 4 men, one led by the corporal and the other by the lance corporal. Each fire team has 1 soldier with a 7.62 mm Maxim IGSMG and the other 3 armed with Steyr F88 assault rifles. 1 rifle is equipped with an attached 40 mm grenade launcher attachment for the lance corporal and the grenadier, while fire team Bravo has AHK HK 417 7.62 mm for the designated marksman role. More recently, the designated marksman of an Australian fireteam has been issued the HK 417 in Afghanistan and possibly afterwards. The platoon may also have 3 Mag 58 general-purpose machine guns, 1 M2 Browning heavy machine gun or a Mk19 grenade launcher at its disposal. British organisation. In the British Army, a rifle platoon from an infantry company consists of 3 sections of 8 men, plus a signaller, a platoon sergeant, the platoon commander and a mortarman operating a light mortar. This may not be the case for all British infantry units, since the 51mm mortars are not part of the TOW post-Afghanistan. Under Army 2020, a platoon in the heavy protected mobility regiments will consist of around 30 soldiers in 4 Mastiff FRE SUV vehicles. As of March 2016, the British Army is reviewing whether to retain the FN Herstal Paramini 5.56 by 45mm light machine gun and the M6-640 Commando 60mm mortar at platoon level in dismounted units. Each section is commanded by a corporal, with a lance corporal as second in command and 6 riflemen divided into 2 4-man fire teams. Support weapons platoons are generally larger and commanded by a captain with a colour sergeant, a WO2 as 2IC. Some sections are 7-man teams. An armoured platoon is known as a troop. Bangladeshi organization. In the Bangladesh Army, infantry regiments have platoons commanded by a major or a captain, assisted by 2 to 4 lieutenants and at least 2 sergeants. The platoon strength is typically 30 to 50 soldiers. These platoons are equipped with at least 1 heavy machine gun, rocket launcher or anti-tank gun, with the crews of these weapons commanded by a corporal. In addition, there are at least 2 light machine guns, each commanded by a lance corporal. Each soldier is armed with an automatic or semi-automatic rifle and all commissioned officers carry a sidearm. Canadian organization. In the Canadian Army, the infantry platoon commander is a second lieutenant, or a junior captain assisted by a platoon warrant. It is usually divided into 3 8 to 10-man sections and a heavy weapons detachment which will deploy a GPMG and a Carl Gustav, depending on mission requirements. Sections are commanded by a sergeant or master corporal with a master corporal, a corporal in the second in command, or 2IC position. 2 members of a section will carry C9 LMGs and the remainder will carry C7 or C8 assault rifles fitted with either optics or a grenade launcher. A section is broken into 2 assault groups, similar to the British and Australian organization. 3 infantry platoons will make up a typical infantry company, sometimes with heavy weapons as support platoon. In addition, specialist platoons, like reconnaissance or recce platoons, that may be attached to a battalion may be led by a captain and assisted by a warrant officer. Some very large specialist platoons will actually have a lieutenant as the second in command. In many corps, platoon-sized units are called troops instead. Prior to 1940, a platoon might be commanded by either a warrant officer WO3 or a lieutenant. An officer was referred to as platoon commander, while a WO3 in the same position was called a platoon sergeant major, or PSM. Colombian organization. Within the Colombian Army, a training platoon is often commanded by a higher-ranking soldier known as a dragonainte, who is selected for his excellence in discipline and soldiering skills. However, a dragonainte is still a soldier and can be removed from his position if his commander sees fit. For combatant platoons, a corporal or sergeant would be the most likely commander. French organization. In the French military, a peloton is a unit of cavalry or armor corresponding to the platoon, equivalent in size to an infantry section, and commanded by a lieutenant or sergeant. It may also mean a body of officers in training to become non-commissioned officers, sous-officiers or officers. Finally, peloton d'exécution is the French term for a firing squad. Georgian organization. The Georgian armed forces equivalent of the platoon is thus called Ozuli. Translated, it means group of 20, but has no more connection whatsoever with the number. It has been transferred into modern usage from medieval army reforms of the Georgian king David the Builder. Originally, it was meant to be a small detachment of exactly 20 men to be led by a leader of corresponding rank. Almost all smaller formations are based on the designations of those reforms, which originally suggested tactical flexibility by keeping the size of small units in round numbers. Battalions and brigades were not affected by that system. It is unknown whether that usage was abandoned in the 1820s or earlier, but in present days a Georgian platoon still called Ozuli has a similar size to that of other armies. Normally for infantry it has 32 men, but can vary depending on the type of unit. German organization. The German army equivalent of the platoon is the Zug, consisting of a Zugtrupp of 4 to 6 men, and 3 squads of 8 to 11 men each. An Oberfeldwebel is in charge of the Zugtrupp. The Zugtrupp provides support for the platoon leader and acts as a reserve force. 3 Zug make up a company, with the first platoon usually commanded by a company offizier, an Oberleutnant, a lieutenant, who is also the company's second in command. The second and third Zug are led by experienced NCOs, usually a Hauptfeldwebel. In the first platoon, the platoon leader's assistant is a Hauptfeldwebel. In the second and third platoons, the assistant is an Oberfeldwebel. Each squad is led by an Oberfeldwebel, and its size corresponds to the typical passenger capacity of its squad vehicle. Another of these vehicles is used for the Zugtrupp. Sergeants of inferior rank act as assistant squad leaders in the other squads. A Fallschirmjägerzug has special operations responsibilities, and has command positions 1 rank higher than corresponding positions in a standard infantry platoon. A captain is the platoon leader, assisted by a first lieutenant, and each squad has a second lieutenant or a master sergeant in charge, often supported by a long service sergeant, a skilled senior corporal. Hungarian organization. In the Hungarian armed forces, a rifle platoon is commanded by either a second lieutenant or a first lieutenant, with a platoon sergeant, a platoon signaller, an APC driver and an APC gunner comprising the platoon headquarters. There is also in the HQs 2 and AMP-E a designated marksman rifle, either an SVD or a SZE acute P sniper rifle. The platoon is subdivided into 3 squads, each with 8 soldiers. Each squad is commanded by a sergeant. His/her deputy has an RPG. There are also 2 soldiers with PKM machine guns, 2 with AK-63 assault rifles. One is an RPG grenadier. The other is the medic, the APC driver and the APC gunner. Each squad in the platoon headquarters is equipped with an BTR-80 armored personnel carrier. In total, the platoon comprises 29 soldiers, of whom 8 are vehicle crew. New Zealand organization. In the New Zealand Army, an infantry platoon is commanded by a second lieutenant or a lieutenant, with a platoon sergeant, a platoon signaller and a medic comprising the platoon headquarters. The platoon is subdivided into 3 sections of between 7 to 10 soldiers, each commanded by a corporal with a lance corporal as the section 2 IC. Each section can be subdivided into 2 fire teams, commanded by the section commander and 2 IC respectively, as well as normal 2-man scout, rifle and gun teams. There are 3 platoons in a rifle company, which is commanded by a major, and 3 rifle companies in an infantry battalion, which is commanded by a lieutenant colonel. An infantry battalion will also contain an organic support company and a logistics company. Singapore organization. In the Singapore Army, a platoon is a lieutenant's billet. However, in practice, a second lieutenant is usually appointed and then eventually promoted. A typical infantry platoon consists of 3 7-man sections of riflemen and a machine gun team, both commanded by 3rd sergeants, a platoon sergeant and a platoon medic, for a total of 27 soldiers. Beginning in 1992, the Singapore Armed Forces has allowed warrant officers to be appointed as platoon commanders. Thai organization. In the Royal Thai Army, a platoon is commanded by either a lieutenant or second lieutenant, assisted by a platoon sergeant, usually of the rank of sergeant major. In infantry units, rifle platoons are generally made up of 5 squads. United States organization. United States Army historical background. For the 1700s up until the late 1800s, an infantry platoon in U.S. use was a half company, commanded by a lieutenant, assisted by 2 sergeants and 2 corporals. The sergeants, assisted by the corporals, led the 2 sections of the platoon. Depending on the time period, the platoon could include from as few as 20 privates to as many as 44, with 10 to 22 privates per section. The corporals and the sergeant, prior to the increase to 2 corporals per section, led the 2 squads of the section. The squads were primarily a non-tactical subunit used mainly for drill and housekeeping matters, such as interior guard duty, billeting, messing, fatigue details, etc. Indeed, the sections, as well as the platoons, were primarily administrative subunits of the company, since tactically the company seldom employed in other than as a massed formation. The standard procedure, once the company had marched into its position in the line of battle, was for the company to form facing the enemy as 2 ranks by platoon, one behind the other. The commanding officer and the 1 to 3 lieutenants, serving as platoon leaders, and the executive officer would direct the fighting, leading from the front in the attack and on the flanks in the defense. The sergeants acted as file closers, working the line by putting men forward to replace casualties in the front rank, encouraging men to fire, reload, move forward, etc., and, if need be, physically assisting or restraining men who refused to move forward or attempted to flee. The corporals physically led by example by taking the place in the line with the privates and fighting alongside them. Cavalry platoons had a similar organization to the infantry, but with fewer men. Platoons rarely exceeded around 33 men, including the lieutenant, sergeants and corporals. Field artillery platoons, led by a lieutenant, with 2 or 3 to a battery, normally consisted of 2 gun sections. Each gun section was led by a sergeant and consisted of 2 half sections led by a corporal. One half section contained the gun and its implements, its limber and 4 to 6 horses, and several members of the gun crew. The corporal and 1 or 2 privates rode on the horses pulling the limber, while a couple of privates rode on the ammunition chest-led seat. The other half-section consisted of the caisson with its limber, pulled by 4 to 6 horses, and 2 spare horses tethered to the rear of the caisson, and the remainder of the gun crew with the corporal and privates riding the horses or sitting on the several ammunition chest-led seats as described above. In total, the field artillery platoon consisted of a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 4 corporals, 24 privates, 31 horses, 4 limbers, 2 caissons, 2 field guns, 2 spare wheels, plus ammunition, implements, tools, spare parts, and baggage. Modern use. In the United States Army, rifle platoons are normally composed of 42 soldiers. They are led by a platoon leader, usually a second lieutenant, and with a platoon sergeant, usually a sergeant first class. Rifle platoons consist of 3 9-man rifle squads and 1 9-man weapons squad, each led by a staff sergeant. The platoon headquarters includes the place PSG, the PL's radio telephone operator, platoon forward observer, the FO's RTO, and the platoon medic. United States Marine Corps. In the United States Marine Corps, rifle platoons nominally consist of 43 Marines and are led by a platoon commander, usually a second lieutenant, assisted by a platoon sergeant, a staff sergeant. The platoon headquarters also includes a platoon guide, a sergeant, who serves as the assistant platoon sergeant, and a messenger. Rifle platoons consist of 3 rifle squads of 13 men each, led by a sergeant. In the attack or in a deliberate defense, rifle platoons are usually augmented with a 2-man mortar forward observer team and are often reinforced with a 7-man machine gun squad and/or a 4-man assault weapons squad. A weapons platoon will usually have a first lieutenant and a gunnery sergeant due to the generally larger number of Marines in these platoons, and the more complex weapon systems employed. A rifle company weapons platoon has a 60mm mortar section of 13 Marines with 3 M224 LWCMS 60mm mortar squads, an assault section of 13 Marines and 6 SMAW rocket launchers divided into 3 squads of 2 teams each, and a medium machine gun section of 22 Marines and 6 M240G general-purpose machine guns divided into 3 squads of 2 teams each. The infantry battalion weapons company consists of 3 heavy weapons platoons, 81mm mortar, heavy machine gun, and anti-armor. Each of these 3 platoons is divided into sections, 3 sections of 2 squads each in the heavy machine gun platoon, 2 sections of 4 squads each in the 81mm mortar platoon, 1 section of 2 squads with 4 teams each in the javelin missile section, and 1 section of 4 squads with 2 teams each in the anti-tank tow missile section. Marine rifler weapons platoons would also have from 1 to 4 Navy hospital corpsmen assigned along with the Marines. Platoons are also used in reconnaissance, light armored reconnaissance, combat engineer, law enforcement, Marine Security Force Regiment, and fleet anti-terrorism security team companies. In armored vehicle units, platoons consist of sections containing 2 or 3 vehicles and their crews. Tank and light armored reconnaissance platoons consist of 2 sections, each containing 2 tanks, light armored vehicles and crews. Assault amphibian vehicle platoons consist of 4 sections, each containing 3 AAVs and crews. Combat engineer assault breacher sections consist of 2 CEV assault breacher vehicles and crews. In low-altitude air defense batteries, the firing platoons consist of 3 sections, each consisting of a section leader and 5 2-man Stinger missile teams. In artillery batteries, the firing platoon consists of 6 artillery sections, each containing 1 gun with its crew and prime mover. United States Air Force. The United States Air Force has a similarly sized and configured unit called a flight. A flight usually ranges from a dozen people to over 100, or typically 4 aircraft. The typical flight commander is a captain. The typical flight chief is a master sergeant. Letter designations can be used, such as Alpha Flight, Bravo Flight, etc. USSR organization. A motorized rifle platoon in the Soviet armed forces was mounted in either BTR armored personnel carriers or BMP infantry fighting vehicles, with the former being more numerous into the late 1980s. Both were led by a platoon leader and assistant platoon leader and consisted of 3 9-man rifle squads mounted in 3 vehicles. In both BMP and BTR squads, the driver and vehicle gunner stayed with the vehicle when the rest of the squad dismounted, and one squad in the platoon would have one of the riflemen armed with an SVD sniper rifle. There was either 1 empty seat in each BTR or 2 empty seats in each BMP to accommodate the platoon leader and assistant platoon leader. Tank platoons prior to the late 1980s consisted of a platoon headquarters squad and 3 tank squads, each consisting of 1 T-64, T-72 or T-80 tank for 12 personnel and 4 tanks total. Platoons that used the older T-54, T-55 or T-62s added another crew member for a total of 16. However, tank units operating in Eastern Europe began to standardize the platoons to just 2 tank squads, for a total of 3 tanks and 9 personnel.